The book of Isaiah is one of the most prophetic books in the Bible, with more than 100 prophecies about the coming of the Messiah, 40 of which have been fulfilled in Jesus Christ, all written 700 years prior to his birth. But there may be an even larger, more prophetic parallel between the book of Isaiah and the entire Bible itself. In fact, some have gone as far to say that Isaiah is a miniature version of the entire Bible. What do I mean? Well, let's start with how it's divided up. Isaiah is 66 chapters, broken up into two parts. The first part is contained by 39 chapters and the second 27 chapters. Interestingly, the Bible itself contains 66 books, and it also is broken into two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And just like Isaiah's two parts, the Old Testament contains 39 books and the New Testament 27. In addition, there are a little over 31,000 words in Isaiah, whereas there are a little over 31,000 verses in the King James Bible. Wow! That's pretty interesting, but if you thought the parallels so far were amazing, wait until you see what's next. Now we know that the Bible did not get chapters and verses until almost 500 years ago, and due to this, many skeptics of this theory believe the separation of chapters and verses is not inspired like the word itself, but rather an interesting coincidence. However, no matter which side of the debate you're on, we can't deny that those who broke up the Bible in chapters and verses did their best to accurately reflect how the author might break up each book. Now, as we dig deeper into this mystery, let me know where you land on this debate. And I want to let you know that I recently launched my YouTube store, which can be found on my channel page, with lots of different products that praise the name of God and allow you to share your faith outwardly, and also support my channel so I can continue making more content. Proponents of the theory that Isaiah was prophetically crafted to encapsulate the entire Bible suggests that each chapter in Isaiah corresponds to each book of the Bible. So, Isaiah chapter 1 should represent Genesis, Isaiah chapter 2, Exodus, and so on. They say that long before the birth of Christ, God placed connections in the book of Isaiah, linking it to every book in the Bible. These connections were not visible to those in antiquity, as the rest of the Bible was being written down or assembled. Rather, God concealed this mystery for more than 1,500 years until the Bible was given chapter and verse divisions. If that sounds odd to you, remember that this concept of concealing the mystery of Scripture until a later date is not foreign to the Bible. In the book of Daniel, the archangel Gabriel tells Daniel to seal up the scroll until the appointed time. Let's look at these connections, starting with Isaiah chapter 1, which would correspond to none other than the book of Genesis. In the beginning of Isaiah, in fact, right at verse 2, it reads, "Hear me, you heavens, listen, earth, for the Lord has spoken." Now that verbiage sounds very similar to the beginning of the Bible in Genesis 1:1, which it says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, let there be light." In both the Isaiah and Genesis passages, it speaks of the heavens and the earth in the same order, and each emphasize God speaking over creation, setting up what's about to come next. And this is where it gets really interesting. The following phrase in the Isaiah passage has God speaking, saying, "I reared children and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me." This passage no doubt brings about imagery of the fall in Genesis and Adam and Eve's rebellion. Not to mention, we learn throughout Genesis God's relationship with his people and the judgment of sinners like Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, both Isaiah 1:9 and Genesis 19:24 speak of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Amazingly, in Isaiah 2, we see God calling his chosen people out of a land of idols to a mountain where he pointed them to the law. It says, "And many peoples shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." That's basically the premise of the book of Exodus, the second book of the Bible. We read in Exodus chapter 19, verse 20, "The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai, and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up." And it is there where God delivers his law to Moses. We read beginning in chapter 20, verse 1, "And God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me." And he continues to read out each command of the law after that. Exodus also recounts the famous destruction of the proud Pharaoh, who continually hardened his heart before God. And in Exodus chapter 5 verse 2, he says, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice?" This passage and what follows clearly points to the message in Isaiah 2, which says, "For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon every one that is proud and lofty, and upon every one that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low." And as we know, no one was more proud or brought lower than the Pharaoh. When I heard this theory about Isaiah being a prophetic miniature version of the Bible, I was skeptical, so the first thing I did was go to the 40th chapter of Isaiah, which, if this theory were true, would point us to the first book of the New Testament, Matthew. And indeed, I found something interesting, a verse that stood out in Isaiah 40, which is a poem about the time and coming of Christ, followed by encouragement to recognize him as the likeness and true image of the Almighty God. In Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, it says, "A voice of one calling, in the wilderness prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God." This is a clear prophecy of the coming of John the Baptist, who was to prepare the way for the Messiah to come in Jesus Christ. And in the 40th book of the Bible, in Matthew, in chapter 3, verse 3, we get John the Baptist responding to the priests by quoting Isaiah. And he says, "For this is he who was spoken by the prophet Isaiah when he said, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight." Wow, that's pretty interesting, but it should be noted that all four Gospels quote Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3 in one way or another. But what I found even more interesting is we know that although Matthew is the first book listed in the New Testament, Mark is actually the oldest book and was written before Matthew. So I went back to look at how Mark opens up. And you wouldn't believe it, the very first words of Mark, the first God-breathed words to be written after the Old Testament canon was completed, was this passage, which reads in Mark, "The beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. As it is written in Isaiah the prophet, I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way. A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight paths for him." All I can say is, wow, that's pretty interesting. The fact that Isaiah 40 would represent the beginning of the New Testament, and the very first words to be written in the New Testament, historically, is Isaiah 40. What do we make of that? Now, if we stay on this track of the New Testament in Isaiah, we also find the New Testament concept of God as Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, begins in the New Testament chapters of Isaiah, which are chapters 40 through 66. The second part, the 27 chapters at the end, as I mentioned earlier. Even more remarkable is the fact that chapters 40 through 66 divide very clearly into three sections, each of 9 chapters. So in chapters 40 through 48, the theme is comforting God's people. In chapters 49 to 57, the theme is the servant of the Lord, who dies and rises again. And chapters 58 to 66 are about the future glory. Furthermore, each of these sections of 9 chapters divides into 3 sections of 3 chapters. If you take the middle section, there are 3 very clear sections, chapters 49 to 51, 52 to 54, and 55 to 57. Now, if you take the middle section, chapters 52 to 54, and focus on the middle chapter, chapter 53, that chapter divides into 3 sections itself. If you take the middle section again of that chapter, it begins with Isaiah 53, verse 5, which reads, "He was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed." That verse right there is the very heart of the New Testament. It is the gospel. And it's located at the center of the New Testament chapters of Isaiah. Again, wow. Alright, what about the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible? Does it correspond to Isaiah chapter 66, the last book of Isaiah? Yes, and it's pretty amazing. Let's read Isaiah chapter 66, verse 22. "For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain." And what do you know? Revelation chapter 21, verse 1 and 7 say, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son," or if you want to say seed, like in Isaiah. These are just a few of the supporting facts of this theory that Isaiah was prophetically written to foretell the entire Bible. Now, there are plenty of reasons to doubt this theory, including the fact that many don't agree on the order of the books of the Bible. Catholics, for example, have many other books in their Bible, including Baruch, Judith 1 and Judith 2, Maccabees, Sirach, Tobit, and Wisdom. Plus, skeptics could argue that some of these references are a bit of a stretch. Personally, I think there is something to this theory.
It must be true.
But I'm not going to die on this hill, especially because Isaiah has already proven to be the inspired word of God, with so many examples of prophecies that came true. This would just be icing on the cake. What do you think? Did Isaiah prophetically write the entire Bible in the 66 chapters of his book? Take care and God bless.